Welcome to Monkey Tales. Today, we're diving into a new story, filled with emotions and drama. Let's get started. I left my injured mother alone, because she cut me out of her will. Ignoring her scolding messages, I chose my life. I never imagined my life would revolve around managing crisis growing up. My family seemed ordinary enough. My mother was a vibrant woman, always bustling about with endless energy, and my younger brother and I were close. Typical siblings, with our fair share of rivalry and camaraderie. My father, a steady presence, worked hard to provide for us, until his untimely passing when I was in my early 20s. His death left a void, but we managed to hold things together. It wasn't until my mother retired that everything started to unravel. Retirement was supposed to be a golden period for my mother at times to relax and enjoy the fruits of her lifelong labor. Instead, it marked the beginning of a series of unfortunate events that would drastically alter our family dynamics. My mother, once the pillar of strength, became the most accident and illness-prone person I had ever known. It's almost as if a dark cloud settled over her life the moment she stepped away from her job. Throughout these years, my younger brother was largely absent. He's single with no kids and few responsibilities. Yet he rarely stepped up. He would visit during his summer vacations, help with superficial tasks like moving furniture or taking her car in for service, and then disappear until it suited him to visit again. In contrast, one married with kids in school, a demanding career, and a side gig to keep us financially stable. Despite my full plate, I was the one who had to respond to every emergency. It became an unspoken rule. If something happened to Mom, I was the one who dropped everything to be there. The dynamic between my mother and brother has always been different. She dotes on him often, praising his minimal efforts as if they were grand gestures. When he does something as simple as hanging a picture or fixing a leaky faucet, she showers him with compliments. It's infuriating because in her eyes, he can do no wrong while my sacrifices go unnoticed, or are taken for granted. It's as if I'm invisible, only summoned when there's a crisis. Her dependency on me has only grown over the years. Each time she's been hospitalized or needed extensive care, it's fallen on me to arrange everything. I've had to burn through my paid time off, cash, and savings, and leave my own family to fend for themselves. My kids have had to celebrate milestones without me, and my spouse has had to pick up the slack at home. It's been a relentless cycle of sacrifice and neglect, all while my brother continues his carefree existence. Balancing my family responsibilities with my work and personal life has been a Herculean task. Each day feels like I'm walking a tightrope, trying to keep everything from crashing down. My career, once a source of pride and fulfillment, now feels like a juggling act, where one misstep can send everything tumbling. My job requires long hours and a high level of commitment, and while I enjoy the challenges, it leaves little room for anything else. Add to that my side gig, which was initially a passion project but has since become a financial necessity, and you have a recipe for constant stress at home. My children demand and deserve my attention. They're growing up fast, and every missed milestone feels like a dagger to the heart. I've missed school plays, sports events, and countless family dinners because I had to rush to my mother's side. My spouse has been incredibly supportive, picking up the slack and managing the household in my absence, but it's taken a toll on our relationship. We rarely have time for each other, and when we do, I'm often too exhausted to engage meaningfully. The weight of my mother's needs presses down on me, constantly, turning even moments of respite into periods of guilt and worry. My younger brother, on the other hand, seems to live in a different world entirely. He's single, with no kids or significant responsibilities. He works low-wage jobs, hopping from one to another, without much thought about the future. His carefree lifestyle stands in stark contrast to my own, and it's a constant source of frustration. He only helps when it's convenient for him. Like during his summer vacations, he'll visit my mother, do some superficial tasks, like moving furniture or taking her car for service, and then vanish again until his next convenient window. I remember one particularly frustrating incident. It was the middle of winter, and my mother had slipped on ice, breaking her hip. The hospital called me as usual, and I had to drop everything to be there. My brother, who was between jobs at the time, didn't offer to help. He was planning a ski trip with friends and didn't want to cancel. I ended up spending 2 weeks with my mother, arranging for her surgery, managing her post-operative care, and ensuring she had everything she needed for her recovery. My job was understanding, but I had to take unpaid leave, and the financial strain was palpable. Another time my mother was diagnosed with pneumonia. It was a severe case, and she was hospitalized for several weeks. My brother was working a temporary job at a resort, and when I called to ask if he could come down, he flat out refused, saying he couldn't afford to lose the job. Once again, I was the one who had to step in, coordinate her care, and spend sleepless nights at her bedside. My children had to fend for themselves, and my spouse had to manage the household alone, all while I was hundreds of miles away. There was also the time my mother had a head-on car collision. It was a rainy afternoon, and I was in the middle of an important meeting. When the hospital called, my heart sank. As I listened to the nurse explain the severity of the accident, I immediately left work, catching the next flight to be with her. My brother, who was living rent-free with a wealthy relative, didn't even bother to visit. He said he had commitments that he couldn't break, but I knew better. He simply didn't want to deal with the inconvenience. Not long after she recovered from the accident, she was diagnosed with cancer twice. The first time was breast cancer. The doctors caught it early, and she underwent surgery and chemotherapy. The treatments took a toll on her, both physically and emotionally. I was there for every appointment, every tear-filled night. Just as we thought we were in the clear, she was diagnosed with a different type of cancer. A year later, more surgeries, more treatments, and more sleepless nights for both of us. As if the universe wasn't done testing us, she was involved in another car accident, this time getting T-boned at an intersection. The injuries weren't life-threatening, but they compounded her existing health issues, making her even more dependent on me. Each of these emergencies has left scars, not just on my mother but on me and my family. I've burned through my paid time off, cashed in savings, and missed countless moments with my own children. My spouse has been my rock, but the strain is evident. We rarely have time to connect, and when we do, the looming shadow of my mother's next crisis hangs over us. It's a relentless cycle of sacrifice and neglect, and it's wearing me down. My brother's behavior adds salt to the wound. He'll visit during his summer vacations, taking my mother out for lunch or doing minor repairs around her house, and she showers him with praise. "Look at how handy he is," she'll say, showing me a picture he hung or a shelf he fixed. It's infuriating here. I am sacrificing my time, money, and emotional well-being, and he gets a lot for the bare minimum. My mother's blind spot for his indifference, and my resentment grows with each passing day. The passive-aggressive texts, for my mother, are a constant reminder of the imbalance. "Your brother hung this lovely picture when he was here last summer," she texts, followed by a photo of a mediocre piece of art. Or, "He took my car in for service." Such a help. It's as if she's trying to rub salt in the wound, reminding me of his occasional convenient contributions, while ignoring my constant grueling efforts. When I asked if anyone else could step in, the answer is always the same: "But you're the one she wants." It's an infuriating mantra that makes me feel both dispensable and undervalued. My brother's ability to responsibility without consequence only amplifies my frustration. I've had to develop a thick skin, learning to navigate the emotional landmines of our family dynamics while trying to maintain my own sanity. The emotional toll is immense. I love my mother dearly and I want to be there for her. But the constant pressure and lack of appreciation have worn me down. It's not just the physical care. It's the emotional labor of constantly being the one to hold everything together. A few months ago, I stumbled upon a document that would shake me to my core. While cleaning up my mother's office, I accidentally discovered her will. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to organize her cluttered paperwork. My heart stopped when I saw my mother's signature on the document, and I couldn't help but read it. The contents of the will were a gut punch. Except for some small amounts left to my children, she was leaving everything to my brother. The total estate was valued at over $250,000. I was stunned, hurt, perplexed. It felt like a betrayal. After everything I'd done for her, all the sacrifices I made, this was her decision. The next day, I called her, my hands trembling as I dialed her number. The conversation started off casual, but my heart pounded as I broached the topic. "Mom, I found your will while organizing your papers." I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I noticed that you've left almost everything to my brother. I don't understand. Can we talk about this?" There was a long pause on the other end. Then she sighed deeply. "I don't want to discuss it," she said, her tone icy. "It's my decision, and that's final." "But Mom," I pleaded, my voice breaking, "I've done so much for you. I've been there through every crisis, every emergency. Why would you leave everything to him?" Her response was curt and dismissive. "He needs it more." End of discussion. With that, she hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief, tears streaming down my face. The woman I had dedicated so much of my life to, the woman I had sacrificed countless hours and emotional energy for, had dismissed my concerns in a matter of seconds. I tried reaching out to her again, sending texts, leaving voicemails, but she ignored every attempt. It felt like she had built a wall, shutting me out completely. I was left to grapple with my emotions, alone, a hurt and confusion gnawing at me. Desperate for answers, I turned to her siblings, hoping they could shed some light on her decision. It was my aunt, her older sister, who finally broke the silence. We met at a local coffee shop, a neutral ground, where we could talk without interruption. She's doing it to ensure your brother can retire comfortably, my aunt explained, her expression a mix of sympathy and resignation. He's always worked low-wage jobs, and she wants to make sure he'll be okay. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But he lives rent-free with a wealthy relative. I argued he has no expenses. Meanwhile, I've been struggling to balance everything. Sacrificing so much, how is this fair? My aunt sighed. I know it doesn't seem fair. But in your mother's mind, she's doing what she thinks is best for him. She's always worried about him, and she believes this is the way to secure his future. Her words did little to comfort me. Instead, they fueled my sense of injustice. My brother, who had lived a carefree life, was being rewarded, while my efforts and sacrifices went unrecognized. The emotional impact was devastating. I felt undervalued, unappreciated, and deeply hurt. The turmoil inside me was relentless. I replayed the conversation with my mother, over and over, in my mind, each time feeling the sting of her indifference. My nights were sleepless, filled with anxious thoughts, and a deep sense of betrayal. I couldn't understand how she could so easily dismiss everything for her. At home, the strain was evident. My spouse tried to comfort me, but I was inconsolable. The children sensed my distress. Asking why I was so sad, it broke my heart to see their worried faces, knowing that my own family was suffering because of the emotional weight I was carrying. My brother, oblivious to the chaos his preferential treatment had caused, continued with his life he would call occasionally, boasting about his latest adventures or plans, completely unaware of the storm brewing within me. Each conversation felt like a reminder of my mother's betrayal, deepening my resentment. One night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, my spouse turned to me and said, "You need to let it go for your own sake and for ours. You can't keep carrying this burden." Their words struck a chord. I realized that I was allowing my mother's decision to consume me, to dictate my happiness. But letting go was easier said than done. The sense of being undervalued and unappreciated had burrowed deep into my psyche, affecting every aspect of my life. I began to pull back from my mother, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. The constant pressure and emotional labor were too much to bear. I stopped responding to her passive-aggressive texts, choosing instead to focus on my own family and their needs. Despite my best efforts, the fallout was inevitable. My mother continued to send guilt-laden messages, painting herself as the victim. "I understand you're too busy," she would write, "but it's so hard to manage without you." Each message felt like a dagger, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. Relatives started to call, questioning why I wasn't helping as much as before. They couldn't understand the emotional toll it had taken on me, the sense of betrayal that had driven me to this point. I felt isolated, caught between my duty to my mother and my need for self-care. In the end, I had to accept that I couldn't change my mother's mind or her will. I had to find peace in knowing that I had done my best, even if it went unrecognized. It was a painful lesson in setting boundaries and prioritizing my own well-being. As the months passed, I slowly began to reclaim my sense of self. I focused on my career, my spouse, and my children, finding joy in the moments I had previously missed. The wounds from my mother's betrayal still ached, but they no longer defined me. I was learning to let go one step at a time. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when the phone rang, breaking the fragile tranquility that had settled over our home. I glanced at the caller ID and saw it was the hospital. My heart sank, a familiar dread washing over me. Bracing myself, I answered, only to hear the now routine script of disaster. My mother had been in another accident. This time, she had fallen down a flight of stairs in her home. The fall had resulted in a fractured hip and several bruises. The nurse on the other end of the line explained the severity of her injuries and the immediate surgery she required. As I listened, a sense of déjà vu enveloped me. Another emergency, another crisis. Another expectation for me to drop everything and rush to her side after hanging up. I sat down, my mind racing. My mother had always expected me to be there, no matter the cost, and each time I had complied, setting aside my own life, my own needs to take care of hers. But this time was different. The wounds from discovering her will were still fresh, and the emotional strain was more than I could bear. The sense of betrayal and hurt resurfaced. With a vengeance, I called my mother to inform her. I had received the hospital's message, her voice weak and laced with pain. Still carried an underlying expectation. "I'm at the hospital, dear. They say I need surgery. Can you come down?" she asked, almost as if it were a given. I hesitated, my heart pounding. "Mom, I don't think I can come this time," I stammered. There was a stunned silence on the other end. "What do you mean you can't come?" "I need you. I can't manage on my own." The internal conflict was excruciating. Every fiber of my being screamed to be there for her, to support her as I always had. But the bitter memories of her and her disregard for my sacrifices surfaced, fueling a sense of spite and frustration. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling. Ask my brother to help. He should be the one there for you this time. Her reaction was immediate and defensive. He can't help with everything, especially not with this. He's a man. There are things he just can't do. I need you. Hearing her defend my brother yet again. Excusing his absence was the last straw. The pent-up resentment and exhaustion boiled over. Mom, I've been there every time for every emergency. But I can't keep doing this. I need to think about my own family and my own sanity. Her voice hardened, turning icy. So you're abandoning me in my time of need. After everything I've done for you. I felt a surge of anger and hurt. After everything you've done for me. What about everything I've done for you, Mom? It's always been me, never him. And yet you're leaving everything to him in your will. You're ensuring his future, while taking mine for granted. The line went silent, then she spoke. Her voice cold and distant. If that's how you feel, then maybe you should stay where you are. I hung up, my hands shaking. The guilt and pain were almost unbearable, but there was also a strange sense of relief. For the first time I had put my foot down, refusing to let her needs overshadow my own. It was a decision born of frustration and spite, but also of necessity. As the hours passed, I wrestled with my emotions. The guilt was overwhelming. Knowing at my conscience, I knew my mother was in pain. Struggling without my help, the thought of her suffering alone was almost too much to bear, but I also knew, if I continued to sacrifice myself for her, I would lose what little was left of my own life. Insanity. My spouse stood by me, offering unwavering support. You've done more than enough, they said, holding my hand. It's time for others to step up. You need to take care of yourself and our family. I tried to focus on my family, finding solace in the small moments of joy and connection with my children, but my mother's passive-aggressive texts continued, each one a fresh wound. I understand, you're too busy. She wrote, I'll call my sister if I have to. I just didn't think it would come to this. The guilt and disappointment were relentless, but I clung to the support of my spouse and the conviction that I had made the right choice. I had to believe that it was possible to care for my mother without sacrificing my own well-being. In the end, I knew that my decision was a turning point. It was a painful but necessary step in reclaiming my life and setting boundaries. My mother would have to learn to rely on others, and my brother would need to step up. It was time for me to prioritize my own needs and those of my immediate family, even if it meant facing the fallout and enduring the guilt. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shock, real-life stories happening around you.